My heart to yours. Welcome to another session of these support videos that have been made exclusively for the United States Capitol Police and their families. Today's session is all about becoming responsible. Wait till you see what we have in store. I'm so glad you're here. A couple things before we get started. I'm going to be using the word parent a lot. When I use that word, I'm referring to any caring adult, not just biological parents, any caring adult who right now finds himself helping the growth of toddlers, children, adolescents, or young adults. Um, Thank you, biological and non-biological adults. You are providing a invaluable service to our society. And on that note, raise your right hand really high. I can't see you, but I'm trusting that you're doing this, and give yourselves a well-deserved pat on the back. When we think back to this last year and how we were semi-paralyzed sometimes, we were so overwhelmed. And yet, parenting is hard in good times. And there you are, parenting in these times that no one, not a soul on the planet, has been through before. And you're figuring out, how do you keep yourself in a calmer place when we're in a sea of chaos, so that you can help your children remain calm, right? You figured out, you help them cope in these times when no one knew what to do or how to do it. And yet there you are, supporting your children, making sure that when we were all locked down, that they would still have a connection one way or another. How important connections are. That when they had these big feelings that they were having trouble making sense of, you were there to help them. You exhibited your calmness to help them. For that, I think, if you think of all you've learned in this past year, you probably deserve about 5 PhDs right now. But just every day, look in the mirror and tell yourselves, wow, are you doing are you doing some wonderful stuff? So kudos to you. All right, so let's look at, what are we doing today? Well, when we talk about becoming response able, right, able to respond rather than react, um, how we're going to approach that today, of course, we're going to look at solutions, but I want to make sure that we have a solid understanding of the biology of this, and it won't be scientific, but it'll allow us to understand how chronic stress, trauma, violence um, manifests in our body, and how we react, right? It doesn't mean we're weak. It doesn't mean we're not worthy. It means this is biology. Um, and that will help us to understand and be able to foster that response ability in ourselves, so that we can do that in others as well. And so we'll be looking at cues of danger versus cues of safety, and how, if we know that we're going into some place where ourselves or our children may feel that danger, that cue of danger, that we can plan for that so it won't affect the system as much. And we'll do that by looking at what triggers our emotions, and how can we plan for when we have to come across those triggers, right? And the why, as I've already said, that chronic stress and trauma is stored in our body. It's biology. It's not up here. It's in our system. And when we understand that, it's easier for us to take care of ourselves, right? And to have that exit plan, that planning for emotion, so that we understand what our triggers are, and we can plan for a healthier response when we know we're going to be triggered like that. So how we'll do this is, I'll talk to you for about a half an hour, go through the what, the why, the how, and then there are resources in the text set, which is a link that's under this video. And the text set is just a curated, the resources I use to put this together. I've said it in other sessions, but if this is your first session, the first session you're choosing to watch, I'm going to say it in all of them, right? That I am not here to tell you how to parent your family, right? You have been at this for maybe 6 months, maybe 60 years. You have your own ideas. Your culture has its own ideas of how to raise kids. I'm here to share research um, into some of the strengths that we have, some of the deficits that we have, and how to grow those strengths to overcome those deficits. And then I will give you in these text sets, there's articles, there's YouTube videos, there's research, there's stuff I've created, there's tools that you will choose what works best for you, what works best for you in the context of your family. So the text set is always varied choices to do what I'm suggesting you do in this video. So let's get ready. That's enough talking. Let's get into what we're talking about. And this is about getting to know your nervous system because you're going to need it, and certainly your kids are going to need it. So we're going to talk about two things. We're going to talk about being home, and I'm not talking about your physical structure, the building in which you live. I'm talking about home within yourself, or your children's home within themselves. And then our home away from home. Because when we're in our home in ourself, we can respond, we can be responsible. But when stress sends us to our home away from home, we become more reactionary and not as responsible. So let's look at exactly so we understand this in ourselves and we understand it in our kids, because understanding goes a whole long way in how to deal with it, right? So picture, and you can, if you like, some people sketch while I'm talking through this, and they keep they make a sketch of their home. It can be a stick home, a roof, and a couple walls, and then they start labeling stuff. So feel free to sketch if you'd like while I'm talking through this. So when we're home, okay, and again, that's not your physical home. It's not the building in which you live. It's that home that you carry with you wherever you are, that is within you. It's that place that you go inside of yourself. Some people call it the me and me. It's like the middle of nowhere, but you know where it is, okay? When we're home, when we're in that spot, we're generally, excuse me, calm. We have access to the wisdom, to the knowledge that's in our head, so we can respond appropriately. We can be organized. We can say we're going to do something and follow through with it. We can take care of ourselves. And that doesn't just mean, taking time to do something I like. It also means making the medical appointments I have to make, keeping up with some skills that I need to keep up with, right? I'm paying attention to my life, and I'm making sure that I'm have and doing that which I need, that I'm taking time to play. I'm not isolating myself. I know in times of isolation, not easy, but that I'm doing things with others and that I feel productive. If you've already watched the Brains for Living, the one on neurotransmitter, that feeling productive, we know is all about dopamine. So if you haven't watched that yet, watch that next, because that actually dovetails with this one very well. So that's, if you just sat still for a second with both feet on the ground and you focused on your breath, calmly coming in, deeply, slowly going out, and you feel that settle, just feel what it feels like to be in that comfortable space within you, that home where we can go even if the building we're living in, we're not real happy sometimes, we can we can go within ourselves and feel that safe space in ourselves. That's our home. And it has all those benefits. As soon as we get under stress, we tend to go to our home away from home. And that, in our nomenclature, we call that fight, flight, freeze, right? And that happens when there's more cues of danger in our environment than cues of safety. We get overwhelmed, we go into survival, the older brain takes over. And this part of our brain, this is your prefrontal cortex, touch it right behind your forehead. This is where your logic is. This is where the ability to make good decisions is. This is where your self-control is. This is where your ability to plan and organize is. It's in this part of your brain. And when I go to that home away from home, fight, flight, freeze, this part of my brain is offline. I don't have access to it anymore. Do you get it? That's why we're illogical when we're reacting, when we're emotional, because we don't have access to the stuff that makes us logical. So on the next slide, I'm just going to bring this slide up and just yell out the first thing you say, or tell yourself if you're someplace, right? So if I could hear you, if we were live, I would have heard most of you say fins. Some people would have said dolphin, some people would have said shark. It's shark, you can tell by the back fin. Very few people say water, even though most of the slide, the fins take up maybe 1%, maybe not even of that whole slide. Now, if you're afraid of water, because I've had that when I've done this with students, some students are afraid of water and they saw the water. But this is just I wanted you to get the sensation of that just, you have no control over your brain scanning your environment, right? Your brain is looking to keep you safe at all times. So it's always scanning the environment for danger. And as soon as it finds something it thinks is danger, that's where your focus goes. Not to all the non-dangerous things around it. You hone right in on the danger. That is that cue of danger. And now that you saw the fins, but most of you did not get a physical reaction because you were watching a movie of a picture on a slide, right? It's like so far removed. But if you were standing on the edge of the water and that you saw that fin 3 feet away from you, that would get that, right? And this part of your brain would go offline and you would either freeze. Some people try to fight. I don't know if you saw the video of the teenager who pushed the bear off the wall because she thought the bear was coming after her dogs. That's fight. You don't logically go up and fight a bear, but when you don't have access to this and you're reacting, you go, and if you are a fight person, you push that bear right off, right? So fight, flight, freeze, when you have more cues of danger than you do cues of safety. And oftentimes during the pandemic we just lived through, a mask for some was a cue of danger. And you saw in terms of masks or no masks, there was a lot of illogical behaviors going on because people are under a stupid amount of stress. So in your environment, right, the fins in our last slide, just think of what that's a metaphor for. And now here's this big cat and this tortoise. What you're seeing is our most primal reaction to stress, right? This is when we first were plodding around the planet. there were a lot of predators that we were their prey. So if a predator went by, that was our reaction. We would make ourselves as small and still as possible. We would freeze because we would try to be invisible. And hopefully that would allow the predator to keep going and we would survive, right? In fact, we could probably argue in terms of evolution that the the folks who did this best, that's whose genes we've got, right? Because they're the ones who survived. The other ones were eaten by the predators. So now, fast forward to the summer of 2021, and that big cat can be, just name anything in yours or your children's life right now that is stressful, traumatic, chronically stressful. And when someone freezes, right, that could be they could just dissociate. On the far end of the spectrum, they actually can faint. These are people who sleep a lot, right? That allows them to withdraw. People that shut down, what's wrong? Nothing. I'm fine. Freeze, people will not ask for help, right? Because they're inside. And you, as a parent, as someone, or this could be your spouse, and you're trying to draw them out, right? Think of that tortoise right there. If you picked him up and shook him, or if you tried to draw him out, that's going to make him withdraw that much more because that's what they have to do to regain that feeling of safety. And once they feel quasi safe again, they'll start maybe putting a claw out, maybe putting their beak out. And this is metaphor for us and our children. Now, if this is our go to home away from home, right? If this is when there's a lot of stress, if we tend to freeze, the health manifestations of that can be chronic fatigue, digestive issues, low blood pressure, type 2 diabetes, right? There are physical manifestations of stress in our body if we don't tend to it, right? So being response able is about being able to understand what stress is biologically in our systems and what we can do about it. Um, After freeze, we could be fighters, right? And fighting, when we talk about fight, it doesn't necessarily mean fisticuffs. I could throw something. I can yell and scream, and you can feel beat up, but that's how well I scream. I can just give you that eyes, those eyes that cut right through you. You feel you were just lasered. I can argue and argue and argue. At extremes, I can feel like killing someone or even killing myself. And as with any home away from home, fight, flight, freeze, I don't have access to that logical part of my brain. So I am not making sense. I am reacting, not responding. And then finally, some of us just run away, right? I went out for a ride and I never came back. This tends to manifest itself in the system as restlessness. Some people who the stress elicits a flight response, they're at the gym 7 days a week, but maybe an hour here, an hour there, and then another hour, right? They exercise excessively. Um, they can feel trapped, there can't be enough windows open in the house. They can't wear tight fitting clothing. These are all, and think about it, these are things that happen around us all the time. Now we understand, oh, that isn't someone who's just being annoying. That is a hyper aroused nervous system. And it's manifesting itself. It's not home, it's at its home away from home. So it's either fight, flight, freeze. Now, the health complications, if you're a flight or fight person and you do nothing to mitigate that, you're, you're letting that stress get the better of you. Um, we suffer from chronic pain, from asthma attacks, from panic attacks, from hypertension, right? And if you look at the last bullet there, anybody who's out there who's, reaching pre-menopause, uh, menopausal women are at greater risk. If menopausal women don't do something to take care of their stress, they're at greater risk for these health manifestations than someone who's still 30 years old or whatever age we think of as that. So I'm just going to ask you a couple questions. So that we looked at, right, the biology of stress and being home or being home away from, having access to our prefrontals where our logic is or not. So I want to ask you a couple questions. First, if we were in person, I could ask this question: when you're on fire, what do you do? Everybody in the room could answer choral. We could be in church. Everyone could call out what? Stop, drop, and roll, right? And why can we all do that? Because our federal educational program has spent time, talent, and money on making sure we all know that. There's PSAs, there's teaching in preschool, there's teaching in daycare, there's teaching in kindergarten. Now, the question is, how often does somebody catch on fire? And if you look at the research, it's about 0.0003%, which is a small percentage, right? I mean, do we want to know what to do? Of course. But here's something that will most likely never happen in your lifetime, in your family's lifetime, and yet we all know what to do. Now, if we were all in person and I answered this question, asked this question, when you're emotionally on fire, what do you do? I'd get all kinds of answers: drink, run, yell, cry, right? Because in this country, up until this summer, right, we're now starting to be able to talk about emotional health and mental health. But for so long, it was a taboo subject. You could not be mentally or emotionally upset. You had to suck it up and deal with it. We gave no credence to mental health. And boy, do we suffer, right? We know we have an opioid crisis. However, there are 30,000 more people a year die of alcoholism than opioid addiction, because we have people who are hurting, right? They are spent, and yet just suck it up. You'll be okay. When you're emotionally on fire, what do? The choral response should be stop, drop, and breathe. Now, in these series of videos, we will talk about many roads that we can take to take care of ourselves. And we know that breath is one of those solutions that's so hammered that people just roll their eyes. Like, really, Sharon, you're telling me my breath, if I breathe, that's going to make a difference when I'm feeling like I'm being crushed? Yeah, your breath is your body's commanding officer. Your breath is what dictates to your brain even what it needs to do. So your breath can guide your body into getting back home. Okay? Because we have our body and we have our mind. And the mind and body can be good friends. Because think about it. The body looks to the brain and says, brain, man, do I envy you. You can go anywhere. I'm stuck right here. I can't go in the past. I can't go in the future. Your body is the best mindful tool you have. It can only be in the present, right? That's all your body can do. However, your mind, it can go in the past, it can go in the future, it can go to a new universe, it can go to another level of dimensional thinking, right? Your brain can go anywhere. And then the brain says to the body, yeah, body, you're right, I do. But you know what? It can really be exhausting because I never feel like, I can rest, I'm home. So your breath is both in your control and out of your control, right? If you don't think about your breath, you don't not breathe. You're of course breathing because your automatic nervous system takes over. You need to breathe to live. But unfortunately, if we're not conscious, we can start breathing like 15 times a minute, which what that does is that's signaling to your brain that, get ready, brain, I might need to fight or flight right now. So just get ready, just get ready. So adrenaline gets produced, your heart rate goes up, your blood pressure goes up, your cortisol production, right? And cortisol, if you know anything about cortisol, if you've tried to lose weight, but you have a really hard time losing it right here, that is cortisol. That's your stress. Cortisol protects your inner organs. So it puts that nice layer of fat there so you're protected. So when you learn to take your breath in your control, that you're consciously aware of your breath, and you use a breathing technique, there are many. And in the tech set, there are videos and articles and instructions on all kinds, of different breath practices. But you have to be consciously aware and focus on your breath, right? And then when your mind takes trips all over the place, you bring it back to your breath as you breathe in deeply and breathe out slowly. So there are different breaths elicit different states in your body. Some breath will calm you down, some breath will energize you. That's an important differentiation to know, because when you're helping your children be able to respond appropriately, response able, um, sometimes they are too calm. You need to energize them, right? And we looked at how to do that in our neurotransmitters, but we can also do that with our breath. Elephant breath is a fun one. Your elephants, you're pretending you're spraying yourself with all good stuff, and it's a very energizing breath for kids. Um, Math breath or square breath, that's just breathing in for 4, holding for 4, breathing out for 4, holding for 4. And we go around like that. But you see that remember 90 seconds? That's research that was like 2007 that says when your thoughts, you're all stressed out. So here, I'll model it with this. All right, so you see this snow globe right now. That is, you can't see clearly because your thoughts are all in the way of you being able to see clearly. But as you just sit there, 2 feet on the floor, back straight, maybe you're even lying down, and you just focus on your breath. Sorry, guys, on Zoom, it's hard to hold objects up sometimes. But you see how you're getting more and more clarity as you just sit there. Your thoughts. Now, where did the thoughts go? Where did the snow go? It's on the bottom. When you focus on your breath, it doesn't make the thoughts go away. It just gets them out of your way so that you can see clearly, have access to your logic, and be able to respond appropriately. Now, when it was snowing, that really isn't terrible looking, right? I think it's kind of beautiful. I'm someone, I love snow. So sometimes the ideas that are clouding us and getting in our way or in our children's way aren't negative thoughts. Maybe I'm really looking forward to a prom or my cousins are coming over, or any number of things. We're having pizza tonight. I can get excited about that. And those thoughts, even though they're not negative, they can still cloud my thinking. So there's sometimes that even when I'm feeling really, really awesome, but I need to be clear in my thinking, that I will take the time to focus on my breath and then let those thoughts just clear right out of the way. Sorry if you heard that phone ringing. So now, so we have our breath. There's many breath practices. I'm sure many of you already have adopted. I know that your kids in school are learning some breath practices. Um, So we're also going to, in this session, talk about planning for our emotions, right? And that's being able to recognize what triggers us and then proactively plan for that. And again, in your text set, in the link under this, there's these resources that I'm showing you right now. So when we recognize triggers, if you look at the blue part of this slide, you'll see that down the left-hand column, there are our five senses, right? We see, hear, feel, smell, taste. These are all, rather than do something abstract, we're going to look at what are our triggers concretely, right? Your kids are very sense oriented. They are, concrete means I see it, I can feel it, I can hear it. It's not some abstract thought that I have to imagine what it is. And then if you see across the top row, there's three different contexts. Now, I generated at home, at school, virtual learning. You may want at home, at church, on the basketball court, on the soccer field, on stage, right? Wherever your children or yourself, the context in which they find themselves, where they struggle sometimes, that they get triggered, that's what you're going to look at, right? So those contexts, and always looking at your five senses. So you would just, if I asked you, when you walk in your house after work or after school or after whatever, what are some things that if you saw, it would make you feel good, right? So if you saw that someone had vacuumed the rug, maybe that would make you feel good. If you saw that someone put the groceries away, if you saw that someone emptied the dishwasher, right? And then what, when you go home and you see, makes you angry or is a negative feeling, makes you sad, makes you frustrated, makes you exhausted, right? And then what are some things you see, hear, feel when you go home that are negative? And then you would do that for the other contexts. In this is at school of virtual learning. So this is what it actually looked like. This is a sample from a middle school student I was working with. And I'm just going to do one for time's sake here. So visual, he told me that when he notices his mom gets the menu from the pizza place to call and order pizza, that makes him really happy. When he sees his cousin's car pull up in the driveway some weekends, that makes him really happy because he knows he's going to have a ball. Some negative things that he sees is when his younger sister, when he goes to get a sweater and it's missing because his younger sister borrowed it. That sets him off. You see at school, it makes him feel good if his friends saved him a seat. But then if he goes into math class and he sees that incompetent sub when the class is just going to be chaos, he gets that feeling in the pit of his stomach. And then virtual learning, because this school was still, they were doing a blended kind of thing, that they're doing a Pictionary activity with their vocabulary words. He loves that when they all use the common whiteboard. And what's negative is when he sees the teacher begin to struggle, right, with the technology, because just like as parents, you've learned a lot in the last year, educators have changed what they do, right? So we pick one, right? You can't work on all of them at once. You pick one. And oftentimes the positive thing in terms of systems is when you work on one, oftentimes it trickles out to others. So this is a sample that we did with him. He chose the virtual classroom when so the activity is that right from the recognizing your triggers, right? The virtual classroom, the teacher begins to struggle with technology. Then we look at, because especially with our kids, it's important that we give them names for their emotion, because many kids are just sad, mad, hungry, sad, mad, sleepy. They don't have a wide variety. And the more words, research tells us, the more words middle school students have to describe their emotions, the less depressed they become. So words for emotions, important. So he begins to feel bored. He begins to feel frustrated. Okay, so we know that this is going to happen, right? There's stressful things happen in our lives. So how do we respond? So what he's going to do is he's going to practice that square breath that I talked about a slide ago, right? That we breathe in for 4, hold for 4, breathe out for 4, and hold for 4. And then just keep going around the square like that. Some of my students actually draw that on an index card and they keep it with them as a reminder, like, as a trigger to remind them to do their trigger work. And remember, 90 seconds, because 90 seconds is what it takes to clear those thoughts out of our mind. So we looked at how to become response able, right? That trauma, chronic stress, violence, all contribute to our hyper aroused nervous system. To get ourselves back to our home rather than home away from home, right? That home away from home, fight, flight, freeze. We don't have access to our prefrontals where our logic, our good thinking, our good decision making, our self-control is. Your breath is your commanding officer. The more you learn how to consciously use your breath, the more response able you will become. And then the added is having that exit plan to plan for your emotions. Look at what triggers me and how can I plan so that I won't be triggered next time. So here's what we know about human nature. No matter who you are or where you are, your instinct tells you to go home. I am truly hopeful that what we talked about this morning will help you chart the way, not just for yourself, but for your children and all those that you love. Thank you for spending this time with me. I'll see you soon.